Hello, everyone. My name is Joey Lloyd. I am the Senior Director of Communications at AVIXA, and I want to thank you for taking the time to join us today. It is just 12 o'clock now, and we've got a few more folks still hopping on, so we're going to give it just a few minutes longer before we get started. All right. Hello again. My name is Joey Lloyd, and I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us today for our roundtable discussion, leveraging generative content to create immersive retail destinations. I want to thank the folks at SHOP for having us today. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with SHOP, SHOP Environments Association is the global trade association that is dedicated to enhancing retail environments and experiences. They represent more than 1,200 members and companies and affiliates worldwide from 25 countries. The association brings value to the global marketplace through programs in industry leadership, research programs and industry certification, education, and networking events. I think I could have just talked about AVIXA, so I'll roll us right in because there's a lot of the same things there. As I mentioned, Joey Lloyd, I am the Senior Director of Communications, and I am joined today by these wonderful ladies, Laura Davis-Taylor of In Reality, Pavani Yala of Second Story, and Sharon Lasard of Under Armour. Today, retailers are continually seeking new and innovative ways of attracting shoppers, and many are opting for more digital signage. The challenge then is creating enough engaging content to keep all of that digital signage fresh. Today, we're going to spend some time discovering what is known as generative content and leveraging the software and computing to automatically combine pre-designed content and data feeds that create original visuals and real-time and on an ongoing basis. So I hope that you will get social with us, and you can find me at Joe Lloyd on Twitter, and you can also find us at AVIXA, and I look forward to continuing the conversations there. As the Audiovisual Integrated Experience Association, we are the professional society for AV and share a member-first mission, just like our friends at SHOP. We provide educational credits for our members as well as system standards, and look forward to working with each of you to bring every aspect of that to the project, to the table from the beginning to create exceptional experiences that lead to magnificent in retail. You might also know us from our trade shows, having held the largest pro AV show in the world in Amsterdam for many years. And I'm really excited to say that in 2021, we're going to be moving to the FIRA in beautiful Barcelona, Spain. So I hope some of you can join us there. I hope we can all get there. We'll be spending June of 2021 in Orlando for next year's InfoComm show, which is the largest AV show in North America. And that alternates between Las Vegas and Orlando. And if you have some time, you can also check out InfoComm Connected, which is still available with on-demand sessions by going to infocom.org. So today we are gathering experts from the fields of data, technology, and brand expertise to discuss generative content in retail environments. We're going to dive into strategies for leveraging generative content, best practices in the production, as well as ways to measure the ROI for your digital signage campaigns. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Laura Davis-Taylor and tell us a little bit about herself and In Reality.
Hello, thanks for having me, everybody. Like the panel here, I've been in retail for a very, very long time, spent a couple of decades in tech-based experience design for retail stores, but In Reality is really the new focus I have, where it's 100% focused on the data side of things. And as we've been really, really bullish about CX for our retail innovation, so part and parcel is understanding if something you're doing is working or not and optimizing it accordingly. So what our platform does is it pulls together and integrates any IoT sensor to get the metrics that you really need very simply, but also with AI to fuel things like generative content so we can get closer to the context of the moment and be testing different types of iterations to see from both emotional and other different types of kind of metric lenses what isn't resonating so we can get to the best ideal scenario for people.
Thank you so much, Laura. I am going to pass that baton over to Pavani Yala of Second Story.
Hey, I'm an experience design director at Second Story, and Second Story is an experience design studio. So we make specifically interactive experiences in built environments. That's often leveraging technology and digital, but also the physical environment. So we have a really fun team that spans across different disciplines, whether that's architecture or software development, experience design, fun group of people. And we, generative content is one of the things that we do, but we're really just, like I said, making digital physical things in the physical environment. So it's a broad span of things that we're creating. Ultimately, I think the thing that holds all of our work together is that it is usually emotional driven, and there's some storytelling aspect to it. With generative content specifically, this is a practice that we've gotten into in the last few years, I would say. And it's been great for us to be able to create content that is going to get at some emotions that some of our other content is not getting at. And I'll get into that a little bit later, but it's been a fun time for us.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And I'm really excited because we have a retailer with us today to give us that boots on the street expertise. Sharon Lasard of Under Armour, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, thank you. Thanks everybody, and glad you're joining us today. I've been at Under Armour for just over a year and a half, and I have been working from home for a good half of that, it feels like. But, I really believe in bringing a unique perspective to the work that I'm doing at Under Armour, because I actually have a blend of both brand experience and agency experience. And so I really think that that has helped me and afforded me a really unique experience as I bring forward a new concept specifically for Under Armour. And we're launching a new concept in the fall. I can't tell you too much about it today, but I can talk to you a little bit about how we're bringing the physical and digital together as we get into the program. But I'm truly excited to be here, and this topic is really important, and it does definitely bring a brand to life in a way in physical retail that is emotional, absolutely, but it also can be very engaging and beneficial. As I think about, one of our main missions for our focused performer, who is our consumer, it's making them better. And so a lot of our applications with the digital landscape is with that promise.
Thank you, Sharon. Really appreciate that. So to get us kicked off, I know that when we started this process, there were a lot of discussions about what actually is generative content, and the three of you really expanded what I thought the definition was. So Pavani, maybe you can kick us off and tell us what is generative content and provide some examples so that we can illuminate on that.
Sure. Yeah, I'll do my best, because like you said, in the very beginning, we were all talking about this, and I think that there's like a broad definition and there's also a very specific definition. I'll kind of start from where at Second Story, how we define it, and we can go from there. I would say, simply put, the generative content is content that is created somewhat autonomously and in real time. And so, by the way, you're going to hear a crying baby in the background.
Hey, it's the new normal.
I know, right? Like, make sure it's during her nap time. And what's great about both autonomous and real time is that you can kind of set it and forget it to some degree. So unlike pre-rendered content or filmed content, there's a timeline and it starts and it ends and then it's done. This is something that is being generated algorithmically, and so there's like an endless amount of content that can be created. In terms of different types of installations we've done generative that's based on inherently dynamic data sets, like the weather. Let's say the weather's always changing. You can hook it up, and whatever your output is always going to be changing. The example that comes to mind is a lobby installation we did for an energy company where their headquarters is a building that's completely renewable, based off of solar and wind energy. And so we did an installation in their lobby that actually is hooked up to those feeds and showing you in real time in an artful way, what sources that building is using. Another way to get at generative content from a dynamic standpoint is to actually hook it up to something that's sensing people. We are dynamic, whether that's user input, user generated content or reactive or responsive content. So in retail specifically, we've done responsive end caps as an example, where you're trying to capture someone's attention, and as the person walks by, the display is reacting and showing you a silhouette of the person's body. So it gets you to look, and then it gets you to kind of engage. And then you can also have generative content that's not based on a dynamic data set at all. It could be a static data set, but maybe there's randomness, introduced in the algorithm. So the output is still always changing. But I think the key there is that the output is dynamic and it stays fresh, and it's part of what keeps people engaged.
Would it be fair to say that generative content in the long run could possibly save retailers money?
Yeah, I think this would be a good question for Sharon, but I would say so. I would say so because, like I was saying before, there is a set it and forget it aspect to it. So you can basically get a lot of runtime for the amount of effort you put into it. I also think that it's great. We've concepted ideas for retailers in Times Square as an example, right? Times Square, there's signage everywhere, and a lot of it is the same type of signage. It's all advertising, and it's 15-second spots, 30-second spots, and I feel like we tend to now have blinders to that kind of thing because we're just used to seeing it. So the great thing about generative content is not only the runtime you get with it, but and being able to fill those spots, but also it just ends up being more unique. So you end up noticing it. I feel like it helps content stand out in, I call it the sea of sameness. So I think there's a practicality there for retailers as well. But I'm curious what Sharon would think.
Absolutely. Sharon, have you had a chance to use generative content within your stores?
We have not. We do have live feeds from our social media and some of our stores around the globe. Boston, if anybody's been up to our brand house in Boston at Prue Center, you'll see a digital sort of wrap around the ceiling and floor that will continuously update as our, we call them athletes, our customers are actually posting about Under Armour. So that's, one way that we're looking at it. What we're currently doing with our new concept, as well as just thinking about future flagships globally, is, hopefully everybody knows who Under Armour is, and hopefully everybody has at least some Under Armour gear. And maybe you even are using some of our Under Armour apps that you might not know. We've got a suite of apps called Connected Fitness. Two of them specifically are MyFitnessPal and Map My Run. And the way we're thinking about using that content, because we have real-time participants, whether they're logging their food from a nutrition standpoint to, weight balance, or really using our training programs or our recipe programs. It's constantly, being utilized. Since we've been staying from home, we've been pushing out a lot of work from home, exercise routines. And then with Map My Run, it really is, a form coaching of a sense. We launched that recently. And so as we're sort of aggregating this information that our consumers are sharing, we're working on ways of bringing that live into space that actually gives the best running routes globally. So as a global brand, if you're going to be in Dubai, we're going to give you the top 5. But we also have some fun facts in terms of when you use our form coaching, you can become X, percent better. And there's just competition and things like that happen within the app community that we're exploring on how that comes to life in store, so that there is that community build, but also it's content that's constantly refreshing, but it's very specific to making you better.
Got it. So I'll ask, we've talked a lot about what generative content is, but Pavani, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how does generative content make for an immersive experience?
Yeah, I think there's something that's happening psychologically when you experience generative content. And this is just based on our experience. There's nothing, we haven't done any studies per se, but because the content is changing and you as the viewer don't necessarily know exactly what's causing it to change. You don't know the rules, right? Someone has set the rules for how it's changing, but you don't know as the viewer. I think your brain is trying to figure that out. So there's a level of like curiosity that then turns into captivation, because you're trying to figure it out, and your brain's kind of going through that loop of I'm curious and I'm captivated, I'm trying to figure this out. And I think that's what keeps you engaged and immerses you in the content more so than something that's just kind of plain and understood and just out there. So that's just my perspective on how I think people get immersed in generative content.
So Laura, I know that we're going to talk a bit more about data and what that means to us, but before we get in there, you have an in-depth experience in the retail world, and there's one example that comes to mind from a few years back that I if I remember correctly, was generative content. But what can you add in terms of examples and creating this immersive experience?
You must be thinking the AT&T takeover moment. That's exactly what I was thinking too. That was such a good one because it was so early on. It was so hard because we didn't have automated tools then. But spending 9 years helping with technology-based strategy for AT&T, the flagship that they first came out the gate with was in Chicago, Michigan Avenue. And the KPI of that store really was brand experience. So therefore, when we were trying to do something special, we created this thing called the takeover moment. There's over 400 screens across the big screens down to the little screens in that store. And it was with, I believe, YCD Multimedia. They were able to knit it together so that every hour we had a 3-minute takeover. And we had it orchestrated from a multi-sensory perspective. So there was a very, I think Mood Media did a beautiful 3-minute audio loop. All the screens literally started at the front and went, and the whole store just completely took over. We had a custom scent done. I got chills thinking, was that goofy? And literally the whole store would just take, it was like a Calgon moment. And it was beautiful. And when they went to becoming an entertainment focused kind of venue, then we moved it from the entire brand lens of how do we make this store about an entertainment experience with HBO stuff and energetic music, and the scent changed. So that was early on, but we saw what that could do. And we'll talk about this later. That really was more about creating something memorable, something that really took it to the next level. But then you have kind of more specific ones, like we did an experiential store for L'Oreal in Asia, where it was really more about what's the female experience versus the male experience, what's the one for the older 40 female versus the teen. And based on who the original camera, the sensor we had in there saw coming in, the store would orchestrate the right experience for that demographic profile. So that's very different than, like, I worked on a thing called the Living Retail Lab. It was a baby of mine for about 5 years because we're under NDA on so much of this, as you would expect. When we're testing these things, they cost more money, they take time, and a lot of store people are new to this. But if you come from online, it's really not. We've had the model for years, we just haven't orchestrated it for stores yet. Where that one was really more about how do we immerse them in a moment to create revenue, and that KPI was, how do we prove that using generative content, you can hit the message, the creative and the moment closer and show that by doing X versus Y, you lifted by X amount. And that's a really beautiful thing to do if your KPI is I've got to prove that I'm able to get a higher sales per square foot versus I need to make the NPS or the brand perception just a little bit better or more on point.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to move us along to talk a little bit about the challenges and perhaps the safety concerns, because we've started to touch on it, but we've talked about that human data component. So Sharon, I know that you haven't started using generative content yet, but I'm sure you've been looking into it and starting to discover how it can help you. What do you think this type of content could do for you within your stores?
I think the constant engagement, the newness and the freshness. Why do people come into physical spaces? It's usually for human contact and engagement. And so those are the differentiators. If you have really good teammates, salespeople, and they are engaging from that human perspective, that's awesome. But then if you give them a tool beyond just the product and services that you're selling within the retail space and really give them that engagement moment, then, you can strike up all kinds of conversations. And as we're thinking about it, and I sort of mentioned it in the very beginning, we do have apps that do something for you, and we have, great engagement with those apps. How do you make that connection in that physical space where we're making you better through those applications? What are those creative applications in store that can constantly refresh? Like Run Routes is a great example, or showing how form coaching works. You can do all of that tutorial on your app yourself, but if you really have that human that's helping you understand better how to use it, that's what I find really engaging and exciting about some of the things that we're not only in test, but are actually going to be rolling out this fall.
That's fantastic. Pavani, how have you helped some of your clients overcome challenges here?
You mean challenges around how do we get generative content into our environments, or challenges that they might have that are being answered or helped?
I think we could cover all of those. What I had in mind, though, was how do you get somebody on the board with generative content to say, look, you can run ads and we can share models and we can use your displays to do that 20% off sale. But how do you move them into this idea of generative content and the emotional sides of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I feel like it is a hard sell, honestly, right now, because a lot of folks aren't using generative content. Most of our case studies for generative specifically are outside of the retail realm. And it's because there's an artful moment or a brand moment, and that might be like a corporate lobby or, just a place where people are inherently going to have fun, which for us, when we are approaching retailers, it usually starts really early on in the process where we are experience designing or coming up with the experience strategy, working alongside, let's say, store designers. It's great for new stores and specifically flagship stores where the goal is not just a sale, but it's also a brand impression. We were talking about brand earlier. So those are the opportunities where we're really able to pitch the ideas and show a return on experience, not just something that's very transactional. So yeah, we usually just start by mapping out the visitor or customer journey and figuring out where are the specific points in that journey that could use a moment that is a brand moment or an immersive moment, and how does that map back to, again, ultimately a brand impression or even sales. And that's kind of how we approach it, just trying to be really analytical in the get-go and identifying those opportunities.
Thank you for that. So I think we've started to talk about this, and I know I've sort of led us here. So there's a human component to the data. And Laura, I was hoping that you could dive in for us on what does that mean in the current environment, and how could generative content help to address this possibly?
The juicy one. Take a breath before I start. So being an integration and analytics software platform, we jumped into this 3 months ago. I don't want to stand on a wing and a prayer, but based on a really strong gut instinct that if we're in the experience business and our retail stores and our places where we gather as humans are at risk because we're afraid to be together, we're going to have to figure out how to allay fears. So we actually took our platform and started working on how do we integrate the kind of sensors that are providing both occupational counts and safe entry solutions, ways that we could kind of offset these things and make them automated. And who would have thought from a CX perspective, we'd be talking about retail and operations being part of generative content. But what we found, I've been living at 3 month sprints. And I mean, our product has evolved a million times. We're not really tied to hardware. So we're working with all these different people, and we've been in factories, in schools, in retail, and other types of like, use cases in Asia Pac and North America both. And so what we're seeing right now is particularly for retail, retailer's been a little farther behind. That's just like you guys have seen, because we don't really know what we're supposed to do versus what we have to do as far as making people safe. Making sure people feel safe to be there. Okay. So where the predominant need is making sure the employees feel safe to clock in, and people are weighing on how do I make sure that they trust us, that we have their best interest in mind so they can come in and actually enjoy the experience, okay? So part of that is being transparent. And at the point of entry, if you're putting something either for the sales floor to clock into or for people to come in and screen, and a lot of times you were just talking about how you don't want to go in your beauty salon, so you're going to be in there for 4 hours, Joey. We're seeing people in a very manual way do things like asking questions about whether you've been at risk, or taking a temperature, or putting lots of printed signs and sandwich boards outside, or people with clickers, or in case of like Ross, they have like those old school 5th grade flashcards saying how many people are in here versus not. We're trying to automate that, not only because people want to see indication that you're doing something, but we want to make sure that it's accurate. And I think, and what we've seen from about 8 iterations, is that the more we can automate the manual and the more we can make that data available in a way that lines up to brand expectations, because every retailer has brand expectations that our loyal shoppers are really lining up for, then we're going to be a lot better off. But we can also save money and not create a TSA situation at the front of the store, because it can't feel negative. It's got to feel like I'm looking out for you. And even a conversation yesterday I was having, it was, look at right now, everyone's doing things to lure people into the stores, either with a really awesome product or great experience or with a sale. And when it comes down to it, the shopper is going to choose X versus Y based on if they feel that you've got their rear end covered as far as walking in. So we're not only gathering the data to report how many people are here and automate that process of, have you been at risk? Are you going to put other people at risk? But how do I create ways to inform them with digital signs and occupancy count versus the threshold, with whether or not you're following safe standards, and just making sure that they can go, I'm good to be here. Because I personally think that the neurosis we have with touchscreens might be a little overthought, considering we touch a door to go in, and we're touching things all through this door, and there's nothing that, right, Sharon, hand sanitizer is not going to take care of. Come on. And the other side of it is everybody wants to enjoy the experience, and the generative content can be there to say, this is what you're about to encounter. This is what's going on right now. This is what you need to do next. Now come in. The generative content's going to be about immerse yourself and enjoy. It was a mouthful, but.
I love where you ended on that the generative content is the experience that you get to enjoy after you've sort of run the gambit of okay, am I safe? Did I sanitize? You know, all of those other things. I think that's a great explanation. So where do we go from here? I think, Pavani, maybe you talked a little bit about flagship and emotions, and it brings to mind, I have a question that I'm gonna throw out that I didn't prep you guys with. So thinking through COVID and this pandemic, first and foremost, does the flagship still exist?
I think so. I think that we are going to be, Laura, you hit on this a little bit. Everyone first and foremost needs to feel safe, and there's varying levels of that right now. But assuming that safety is table stakes and that we figure that out, I think everyone's also craving escape and escapism, right? Like we're all, even more so, I think, at the tail end of this. So I think that we are all ripe for flagship experiences, however we define that. So I think there's an opportunity for us to like really lean in there to provide that escape and emotionally fill a gap that people are feeling right now. So I think, yes, I think there's still a place for flagship.
Sharon and Laura, something you want to dive into?
From a retailer standpoint, absolutely. I think a flagship gives you the opportunity to really speak to the brand and have that visibility from a brand standpoint that is not only about what you're selling from a product standpoint, but then what you're also sharing, from a brand experience and a human standpoint. And we still have, since we're a global brand, we still have flagships around the world that we're constantly thinking about, the next evolution. And I do think that, generative content is a big part of that. As we were considering Fifth Avenue, that was a big component of that. And, it's not on the table currently, but it's something that is definitely a part of our story.
Thank you, Laura.
I do agree. And Sharon, you've really provided some examples of how you can still activate your flagship as a destination with the unique products coming out of it, like the mask you shared, Sharon. And the stuff that you're doing for workout from home and all those things, those are all part of the brand ecosystem. And I mean, heck, why wouldn't you not want to make sure people are going to wear their Under Armour mask to come in and experience the Under Armour store and have some kind of event going on in there that ties to come in and have a moment to escape or get healthy? And guess what? We're going to make sure it's 100% safe. And we're glad you can gather here. I think we just have to open the aperture a little bit more about the role that's currently playing. And even for us, for people like us, there's a lot more desire to move quickly and maybe entertain some ideas on how to use that flagship that would have taken 2 years before all this happened, right? But people do really crave these experiences still. And as you guys said, it's more than ever now. We just have to make sure they feel okay to be there. And honestly, even talking to some data gurus on a Retail Wire Brain Trust that I was doing a couple weeks ago, what they're saying is if you're a retailer right now, there's never been a more important time to be really, really tied to that loyal customer and even getting their ideas and using them to tie the flagship store and the brand together. Because of all people who are going to get closer to you and spend more with you, it's those loyalists. So it's a fun challenge.
So I think we've definitely put those with a flagship as top of the list here on who could get started with generative content. Pavani, who else should look into this?
I think anybody that has a need to keep fresh, keep their content or stories fresh. So that's definitely flagship. Flagship is maybe more about brand experience and storytelling, but if there is a need to keep things dynamic, even practically just capturing attention, right? So I think that, like I was saying before, generative content has the ability to kind of stand out and capture attention. So I think there's a very practical need there.
Thank you for that. Sharon, moving forward with projects like this and working with partners, what insights can you share with us from that retailer perspective? Maybe, something that's worked really well and maybe something that I wish we had done that one differently.
I think, for us, a lot of the conversation today has been about, generative content that is not, it's generated, it's almost automated, it's not too complicated. I think for us, and that's why I gave the examples of our app usage and the participants that we have, and we wouldn't, identify, anybody's information, within that experience. But, the balance between how do you use participant, engagement, not information, but, best run routes around the globe. We wouldn't know that unless we were receiving that information from our community of participants, right? And so it's that balance between what is private and what is public, and how do you then create from that nuance of public based on participant, engagement. And I'm dancing around it because it's really, I think from a privacy standpoint, I think that's probably the number one challenge if you're really wanting to think about generative content that is on brand, representing brand, taking that brand experience to the next level beyond just automation, if that makes sense.
It sure does.
Probably my two partner experts would be able to put better language around it.
I think you queued up Laura pretty well here. Can you tell us from a data perspective what types of retailers are suited to this, and maybe those that should shy away, or maybe those that should move forward?
Well, I mean, it all goes down to the KPI first for the project, but think about the websites that are out there. When I talk about generative content, I've always said, think of it as the store is a physical website. I wrote a book in 2008 talking about this concept, and it still is amazing to me that we haven't been able to embrace it. And I think part of it is that we haven't had the enabling technology to make it streamlined and easy. But there's no time with a digital screen sitting in a store that at this point in headed towards 2021, we shouldn't be able to follow the model of, hey, there's a certain type of person standing here, and be either anonymous or an opted-in CRM type message, have a meta tag that serves up the right targeted message. I mean, that it really is amazing to me it's taken this long, but we're getting there now. However, it really is about context. And I always say, where are you standing? What product are you looking at? Or what type of a category experience are you trying to create? Now, from a meta tag perspective, would you want to serve up something different if this was male versus female, this age versus that, urban versus rural, the weather's going on and it's raining outside, or it's 85 degrees, or the game just got out, or it's fashion week and so just hit it. It's all about meta tags and being able to have a database that's got content, messages, imagery that can serve up the right thing. And it really is direct marketing 101. And now, based on the CMS systems we have out there and working with people like Second Story, they have the algorithms are able to test that. It's just that if you think about it, unless you've been in the online world, the store people haven't lived in this model. That's really been more the e-com people. And that's the best advice I can give to people, is work with your online people that have been doing this like in their sleep with online banners and SEO and how we're targeting different content on our social channels. It's all right there for us. It just hasn't been inside in our stores. And if we can get there, then we're actually really doing the kind of omni-channel data-based direct marketing through technology that we really should have been activating a long time ago. And platforms like ours are feeding the kind of business intelligence tools on doing things like this in stores, because we call it the blind spot, because we haven't been able to very irrefutably report in a very easy way, I served up this content to this person in this store at this time, and this is what I got with behavior, emotion, and transaction. When I did this one, I got this one. So therefore, we learned A versus B works better. And this is just, again, how it works with online. So I tend to push people on thinking about meta tags, and the data being about test, learn, and optimization. It's in-store optimization, really.
Test, learn, and optimize. I think those are three amazing points.
Yeah, I mean, Laura, when you said, just think about the the store is a physical website. That's so accurate. And, you add in the apps, that's, an additional point. But I think from a retailer standpoint, when you're an online retailer becoming a physical retailer, you already have that comfort. When you're a physical retailer that has then gone online, that has then developed apps, the connection that allows you to share information or, build on that information is a little bit more challenged.
So true. I mean, look at Fabletics and Adore Me and those guys that started online. They're wonderful muses.
Yeah.
Definitely true.
I've also found in working with retailers, again, depending on the organization, there's a lot of silos often between the, online or the loyalty folks or the in-store, or the operations. And it's sometimes just hard to get everyone working towards the same goal because everyone's, maybe incentivized differently. So that's something that coming from the outside in and trying to work sometimes alongside everyone, all these different silos can be challenging to do, Laura, exactly what you said, which is, have it all be integrated and make the most of all of the different individual groups.
It's really hard. I mean, I left 25 years of store design consulting to do this platform analytics because it was the bane of my existence. And if you don't have the revenue, everything comes down to opinion. And when you've got a cross-functional store team that's weighing in on something like that, it's death by duck bite, I used to call it. Your concepts just end up just being neutered to nothing. But when you can show irrefutably, this is how people responded emotionally through the technology, and this is how it varied versus XYZ types of profiles, and look at the lift. And if we extrapolated that lift across our store footprint, that basically you're leaving X amount of millions of dollars on the table right now every month because you're not doing it. All of a sudden, the C's part. And the C-suite goes, I don't care, do it. And it's funny, but it really does take that. It's taken me 20 years to learn that because I'm not an analytic person at all. Joey knows that. Sharon, you know that too. But it's the proof that helps people like you guys get your concepts sold through. And what I love about it is finally we're going to be able to start doing these ecosystems into our stores. And I think we're going to have to train the industry to a degree, but there's always going to be these bright lights that lead it, like you, Sharon.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank the Shop Association for hosting us today, and I want to thank each of you for joining us. Laura, tell our audience how to get in touch with you.
LDT, like Laura Davis Taylor at nreality.com or just nreality.com.
Excellent. Sharon, how can they get in touch with you?
Sharon.Lasard at underarmour.com.
Perfect. And Pavani?
Yala at secondstory.com.
Wonderful. Thank you again for joining us today. My name is Joey Lloyd. You can find me at Joe Lloyd or at AVIXA.org, and we look forward to connecting with each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.